Hello again. Chapter 2. Your mother and I haven't always been called Amelia and Fred Bold, began the twins' father. We used to be Sue and Spot when we were hyenas living in Africa. Every day we scavenged for meat, rubbed our bottoms on plants, and laughed along with the rest of our clan. We lived very near a safari camp, and the human beings were always leaving scraps of food around. I've got a couple of pictures of hyenas there. So most nights we would creep in on the lookout for something to eat, and then listen to the stories they told each other around the campfire. Well, we animals are a lot more intelligent than people realise, and it wasn't long before your mother and I learned to speak human, in particular English, as many of the visitors to the camp were from England. One evening, your father and I were going for a stroll when we came across a large pond, continued Mrs. Bold. Then we found some human clothes discarded on the side. Guess what? Some foolish humans had gone for a swim in the pond and been eaten by a crocodile. Betty gasped in shock. I know, dear, said Mrs. Bold, giving Betty a comforting stroke, but these things happen in the wild. Survival of the fittest and the smartest. It's dog eat dog, or croc eat human in this particular case. They wouldn't have suffered. It would all have been over in a snap. Well, your mother and I had a rummage around, Mr. Bold said, and soon found amongst the clothes 2 passports, airplane tickets to England, a driving licence, and house keys to 41 Fairfield Road. That's our house, exclaimed Bobby. That's right, said his father. But at the time it belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Bold. But you're Mr. and Mrs. Bold. Well, we are now, but at the time we were Sue and Spot the hyenas. Were Mr. and Mrs. Bold the people eaten by the crocodile? Asked Betty. Yeah, they were, said Mr. Bold, who wasn't Mr. Bold at the time of the crocodile incident, of course, but Spot. Well, I suddenly had the boldest idea ever, said Mrs. Bold, or should I say Sue the hyena. Try to keep up. I asked whether your father could walk on his hind legs, and without hesitation he jumped up to show me. I then convinced him to try on the clothes with me, and they fitted us beautifully. That's a good picture. So, tucking in our tails, hiding our hairy ears beneath hats, we decided to pretend to be Mr. and Mrs. Bold and leave the safari park for an adventure and new life in England. Are you for real? Asked Betty. I promise you, said her father. It was terribly hot out there, dear, explained her mother. Played havoc with my mange. So that evening, your father and I walked into the safari park on our hind legs. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Bold, said the man on reception. Have you had a nice afternoon? Yes, thank you, I said. We've just been for a swim in the watering hole. Oh, you must be careful, said the man. There are lots of crocodiles living there. You could have been eaten alive. Your father and I couldn't help it. We started to laugh. Well, it's what hyenas are famous for. I could shot them laughing. Are you all right? Asked the man on reception. Oh, yes, fine. Sorry. Just dead tired. Well, here are the keys to your room. When you get some sleep, the bus to take you to the airport will be here in the morning at 5 o'clock sharp. Good night. Good night, we said. He gave us the keys, and we stared at them. They had a small keyring attached with some funny squiggles over it. What are these for? Asked your father. We didn't know humans locked their doors. Who ever heard of such a thing? Hyenas might not be the most popular creatures in the animal kingdom, but we certainly never go into each other's burrows to steal things. They're keys to your room, of course, said the receptionist. Number 531 at the end of the corridor. Oh, of course, I said. My husband is being very silly. We tottered down a corridor to our room, shut the door behind us. It was the beginning of our exciting adventure. There was no going back now, but of course we had an awful lot to learn. Mr. and Mrs. Bold began to laugh at the memory. Your father had a drink out of the toilet. Your mother did a poo in the shower. We slept in the minibar. We drank the bubble bath. We ate the wooden fruit and the pillows. We were laughing so much, reception phone asking us to keep the noise down. Oh, there's a few pictures that go with that. Nice bit of poo in the shower, lovely. But of course, we'd never heard a phone ring before. When it started, your father thought it was some sort of rodent and bit it. Then we heard an irritable voice say, Mr. Bold, could we ask you to please make a little less noise? It's a wonder we weren't rumbled. The state we left the honeymoon suite in, terrible really. Goodness knows what they must have thought. Fred and Amelia shook their heads at the memory of it all. But then Mrs. Bold continued the story. We'd better crack on, Fred. So much more to explain to the children. Yes, indeed, agreed Mr. Bold. So somehow we managed to pack our cases and get onto the bus to the airport, which is where it happened for the first time. What did? Asked Betty. Your father heard his first joke from the driver. What was it? Asked Bobby. Why did the bus stop? Because it saw the zebra crossing. Ooh. I thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard, and I laughed hysterically. For so long, people began to stare. Of course, we didn't want that, so I managed to calm your father down eventually by putting his head between his knees. And that was the first and really the most important lesson we learned. Don't draw attention to yourself. A very important lesson, children. If people start to scrutinise you too closely, they might notice things about you that, well, get them thinking. And when human beings think too much, it always leads to trouble. Got it, said Bobby and Betty together. So what happened next? Asked Betty, wide awake and eager to hear the next bit of the Bold's adventure. Well, it all got a bit tricky, I can tell you, said her mother. Our adventure was almost over before it began, agreed Mr. Bold, shuddering as he remembered what happened. Oh no, said Bobby, pulling the duvet up to his furry chin. The airport, said Mr. Bold darkly, a strange and dangerous place for a hyena, for lots of reasons. Tell us, cried the twins. Very well, we will, said Mr. Bold. He told the twins to snuggle down and get comfortable under their duvets. Mr. and Mrs. Bold perched on the ends of their beds. It's going to be the longest and most remarkable bedtime story the twins had ever heard. And that will be chapter 3, and we'll read that tomorrow.